to hear.
Okay, I think we're good to go. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for taking the time to join us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris Garrido. I'm going to be logged in as a Synergy host for today's call. We also have Michelle Shanahan, who will be co-moderating with me today. Okay. Today, folks, we're going to be discussing warehouse best practices. We're doing it in collaboration with Portable Intelligence. We've worked with them for many years now at this point. They're a leader in warehouse systems and warehouse optimization. Okay. We do have a good amount of content to get through today, so I'm going to make just the housekeeping pretty quickly. Before we get started, folks, all the lines are muted. Okay. If you joined and did not enter your audio pin, please do so. You can do that by hitting pound, the audio pin, and then pound again, and then it will sync up with GoToMeeting. Okay. Folks, obviously we have the lines muted today. Please feel free to use the chat for any questions. We don't want anyone to miss any questions. We do have time at the end left for Q&A. Okay. Okay, so with that said, I'd like to introduce Dave Carson. He's the Director of Sales and Marketing at Portable Intelligence, as well as Jeff Lem, who's the President at Portable Intelligence. Okay. Guys, if you guys are ready, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thanks very much, Chris. Appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar. Looking forward to getting through some exciting content with you today. So just real quick in terms of how this is going to flow, what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a really quick introduction to who Portable Intelligence is, in case you're not aware. Talk about the objectives for today's session. Give you a bit of our view on what the current state of the warehouse is from what we've observed. And then move into our best practices, which will take us through the bulk of the presentation, get into a summary, and then we've got a thanks and a Q&A. Now, about PI, again, in 30 seconds or less, the elevator pitch is that we've deployed our WMS system into over 70 visual manufacturing customers. And what that means is that we've got a ton of knowledge both in-house and with our customers in terms of how visual integrates with our software and then how to optimize that in a warehouse environment. We've got over 25 years of supply chain experience, so we really are SME in taking a warehouse from where it is today to where you want to get it tomorrow. The objectives for today's session, we want to share some quick hits with you. What we're going to talk about isn't overly difficult, but it is going to require your time and attention. This isn't rocket science. It's not, you're not reinventing the wheel, but it does require you, its due course and attention that you've got to give to it. We want to give you practical take-home pieces that are implementable and actionable. Now, all that being said, we're not asking you to implement all 10 to make a difference. We expect you to take a look at the business, take a look at what makes sense, and pick 2 or 3 and go from there. Now, our view on the current state of the warehouse is that the warehouse is by and large is an afterthought from the manufacturer's perspective. The expectation is that everything's done with cost minimization in mind. The processes don't necessarily support the vision for future growth and whatnot. It's not seen as the entity that can improve the competitive position of the business. So the net result is that there's a lot of homegrown stuff, inefficient processes, few real KPIs and metrics that enable business decisions that help support the organizational view. Now, without further ado, that's going to take us into our best practices. To walk us through those best practices is Jeff Lem. Jeff has, I'm going to say, a ton of experience. He's got his professional designation in materials handling. He's been involved in over 100 WMS implementations. He's seen hundreds of warehouses all across the globe. And to boot, don't hold it against him, he's got his MBA from one of Canada's top business schools. With that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Dave. And good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to be talking about the warehouse. I'm a self-professed warehouse geek. I've more or less done a ton of work in the warehouse, and so you can speak to it at both a high level and fairly detailed level. So I'll try to keep it brief because we do have a lot of material, and each slide on its own warrants almost an hour discussion. But basically, I'll touch upon the highlights and then do a bit of a deep dive on each one, and then leave some room open at the end for Q&A, which you can simply type in or participate when Michelle or Chris enables the call-in feature. So first thing is asset performance, and again, you know, we're going to focus at the high level, and it really we'll start at the perimeter of the warehouse, and then work our way into the actual processes. It goes without saying that if your tools aren't sharp, you're not going to be doing a lot of cutting, nor is it going to be very accurate. And one of those key tools, of course, is your material handling equipment. And I'm referring to your forklift equipment, your reach trucks, even your carts, your cherry pickers, your hand pump trucks. Those all got to be in good working condition, and it goes without saying that you need to ensure that they're on a regular inspection basis. Look at the number of hours logged, check your tires, check the battery, charging stations you have in your facility. Without your material handling equipment working in proper condition, the guys will not, or gals won't achieve the desired output. The racking and dock areas also deserve consideration. A lot of times I walk through warehouses, and it's not uncommon to see dents or certain you know, areas of the racking that needs replacement, or they need to be fortified with some for additional supports. Racking is often people put it up and then forget about it. Bear in mind, like anything else, the racking needs to change over time, and we're going to talk a bit about that as we get into the processes of your facility. Next, look at your dock areas. I mean, you know, look at your vehicle restraints, your vehicle shelters. Is your dock area safe when it's open? Does wind come in? Does water come in, making that area unsafe or difficult to work in from a temperature perspective? Look at your dock levelers. Are they in good working condition? Is it time to get some automated dock levelers that are based on hydraulics as opposed to manual? And then work inside and start looking at your actual IT equipment that's in your facilities. And I'm talking barcode printers, scanners, your wireless network. A barcode printer, you know, a lot of people have a barcode printer that ejects randomly a label at a time. And sometimes that's related to just simply calibrating that particular printer itself, and that takes all of 2 minutes to recalibrate. Likewise, look at the print heads. You know, are you missing some text or lines? It's very common for print heads to burn out over time. Look at your scanners. Are they scanning everything appropriately? Are your keypads worn out? Are your screens getting a little light on your scanners, etc.? And then look at your wireless network. Everybody from time to time develops what we call a dead zone or a dead area in the warehouse where you get no coverage. And that's typically because A, the access point is getting weak because things do wear out over time, or the inventory profile of your warehouse has changed such that you now have blockage occurring and you're not getting as much coverage. So as they say, with any system, you're only as good as the network, and that goes double when it comes to your wireless network in your warehouse. Okay. Next is you look at your certifications and training. As you all know, I mean, safety is a #1 concern, but actually how many of you refresh your safety training, be it OSHA or your workplace hazardous management information system, and even something as simple as first aid. Look at your professional training requirement on your forklift trucks. I believe many jurisdictions require your forklift drivers to be recertified every 2 years. And likewise, if you want to improve productivity, this is the easiest way to get a productivity uptick, just by having your guys properly trained with respect to handling the equipment out there. And then also review your emergency evacuation procedures. You know, if there, God forbid, there's a fire or disaster happens, are your doorway and exits clear? Do you have a pallet sitting in front of there? Is the exit clearly marked? I mean, in some cases as well, some exit doors are left unlocked during the day, so that's a safety hazard as well as a security hazard. So you have to check to make sure all those are working. And also, if you have cameras in your facility, check those as well. Vitally important to have all those areas in good working shape. Dave, do you want to add to this?
In terms of the professional training, what that also shows your staff is that you're making an investment in them and their development. It shows that you're invested in their future and their ultimately their happiness as employees. They see that they're going to grow in their careers, have a path, and they're going to flourish in your environment as opposed to being neglected and just being put to task on a daily basis.
Number 3, your KPIs. I've been through many warehouses, and a lot of times the KPIs are there because that's what's been used at previous companies, or that's what they've seen in other places they've gone to. And the whole idea of KPIs is that they should reflect the needs of the business, where your business is going. And there's 5 general types of KPIs. Your warehouse productivity KPIs, which you've seen as be it lines picked, order fill rate, inventory accuracy, cycle time, store space utilization around how much actual space is utilized versus available. What service levels are you hitting in terms of your cycle time, in terms of stock to stock, picking rates, your equipment utilization. Again, it goes to how well your equipment is serviced, if it's running in prime working order. And then your labor ratios. Big area. We had actually a really heated discussion this morning in our management meeting around the reports that we're building. And one of the key things is identifying the labor ratios that matter. In other words, are you getting proper utilization across the board? So are your guys, if it's a typical 7-hour day, how is that time being spent amongst the 7 hours? Is it spent in picking, inventory transfers, and how does that compare across the company? And then how do you compare against your competitors and other people in the industry? So if you look at some standard KPIs, this comes courtesy of Work, which is a really great association. As you notice that the rankings over the last 3 years haven't really changed amongst the top 5 or 6. So you see at the very top it's on-time shipments. And then if you look further down towards the middle, around you're looking at back orders. All of a sudden, back orders as a percentage of total lines has moved to 9th place. And what that tells me is that it's no longer being accepted because of the fact that we're doing more e-commerce and the units of measurements are actually becoming eaches as opposed to cases. Chances are your customers would be a lot more sensitive to a loss of a each versus a loss of a case. And we could define backdoor orders as either a system back order or a warehouse back order. A system back order is where the system knows it's not in stock. So in theory, that order shouldn't make the floor for picking unless the customer is willing to accept a partial shipment. This back order is what we're talking about here is when it's an unexplained back order. In other words, the guys went out to pick it and it's a warehouse back order, meaning they can't find it. These are the things you need to zero in on and identify, why are we having more back orders, especially when the units of measurement are decreasing, and it becomes more critical to make sure they have a 100% or near 100% fill rate. Now we're going to get into some process reviews. Receiving is arguably the most important process in your whole warehouse. And the first thing, I do when I come to see customers and ask them, are you doing any sort of scheduling around your receiving and doors? Often, if you're a typical visual user, you may have 5 or 6 doors in which you may use interchange between your receiving and your shipping. If you can, it'd be great if you can schedule around the receiving and certainly around the shipping. And what that does is that allows you to allocate your labor time accordingly, as well as make sure you're getting the best utilization out of your particular equipment. If everything ends up going through door 1 or 2, you end up doing a lot more wear and tear on those particular doors. I mean, it sounds simple, but you'd be surprised how often people don't fully utilize their dock doors in their receiving areas properly. As far as these other processes, such as inspection and your OS&D reporting, which is your overages, shortages, and damages report, how is that working? Is it done appropriately? When product comes in that's returned, is it properly segregated? Is it mixed in with other product that you may have received? Is it properly identified? Is your customer putting a proper barcode or return item code on it? Look at your supplier labels. Are they supported within your company? In other words, is your supplier part number used within your business? And the reason why I ask that is that often a supplier's part number will be barcoded, whereas yours may not be on there. So we can easily use a feature in Visual called part alias, and then from there, whenever you scan the supplier part number, lo and behold, your part number will be substituted in place for that. Very simple, easy to do, virtually doesn't cost you much, and all of a sudden you're now scanning your supplier's labels. And going beyond that is that are you using the supplier's trace information? If they're sending you, say, a lot number or a quantity that you can use. Anything that's pre-labeled gives you an immediate opportunity to improve your efficiency so that you don't have to label. Another way you can look at it as well is get your customers or your suppliers involved and have them label on your behalf. And that's, of course, if you do sufficient volumes. And we could certainly help you with that process in terms of how do you communicate that to your customer or give them information as to creating labels easily for you. Look at your RMA process as well. Often we have a lot of our customers are now selling to the large retailers, whereas RMAs may not have been an issue for you in the past. All of a sudden, you start working with the Home Depots and the Lowe's of the world, and the way they do returns is that you get basically pallets of product that's wrapped up and no idea what's on it, and all you get is a pallet. So you have to be able to handle those type of shipments coming back to you, because the stores will not sort it out for you. They just ship it to you. You got to sort it out and give them the appropriate credit around that. So make sure your process you have there on the RMA side can be scalable. And lastly, look at your cycle time, your dock-to-stock cycle time. How long does it stick around in your dock? If you're like most companies out there, your dock is not very big. So the question is, how do you quickly move that back into stock if you have the opportunity to inspect it and basically relabel it and or perform a QA against it? Number 5, cycle counts. You know, often most of you out there, I'm sure you do your annual physical count, and that's more to support your financial statements, your auditors. Whereas cycle counts is something that you can do for the actual warehouse or the business. So the big difference between the two is obviously the physical count. You're counting the whole warehouse. You're shutting it down. You're going to be doing a count for 3 or 4 days. And there's also the time of year when everybody calls in sick, and all of a sudden they can't do that particular count for you. Whereas a cycle count is a lot easier to do in the sense that it's not as much, and it's focused either around locations or specific products. And the easiest way, again, to do that is to think of your products as your A, Bs, and Cs. Your A's are your high movers, and your B's are your middle tier, and your C's are the ones that may only move once a year. And the easiest way to do your ABCs is to use the old Pareto concept. Is that typically 20% of the 80% of the inventory you move out there is probably accounted for as little as 20% of your products. And then the B's are your typically 16% of the value of the products being shipped out, accounted for by 16% of your quantities, and then the balance is your C's. Either way, you want to make sure that you count your C's at least once a year, your B's at least twice or 3 times a year, and then your A's every month. But again, the simple rule of thumb around that is that if you just have to follow turns of that particular product. Ultimately, if you get the cycle counts down right, then what happens is you can pretty much eliminate the annual physical, provided you get your cycle counts up to that magic 97% accuracy. And perhaps the biggest skeleton in everybody's closet these days is obsolete inventory. And unfortunately, a lot of people have to carry that obsolete inventory because it's on the books. It's on the books, and when it's on the books, it typically supports, it's part of the collateral a company uses in support of their operating lines or their loans. And the key thing here is to get ahead of the curve and identify inventory before it becomes obsolete. And as mentioned here on this particular slide, inventory is your biggest asset, and carrying that inventory costs you as much as 20% a year. So what we encourage you to do is run an FSN analysis, which is basically your fast-moving, your slow-moving, and your non-moving products. And then have those conversations with your CFO, with your financial folks, say, here's what we need to write off, here's what we need to move out of the inventory because it's taking up valuable space. And that space could be used, our product could be used in production or shipping. So it's important that you identify those products before, and then have a program where you're going to figure out how to get that inventory out before it loses all of its value. Now here's a bit of a a more complicated slide, and this is particular to manufacturers, right? Here we've got the issuing process, and this is for a lot of made-to-order companies, this is probably their most important process, is how do they issue. The fact that they take on work and they take on orders from customers is the assumption that they have this material in stock, or the lead time is such that they can get it, you know, they can get it in time before they start the work. So let's say for example you take the work, and now you got to start issuing this material to the job itself. So you start with the first step, which is now you're taking this product from a bulk or a bulk storage area, and you go into what we call a kitting stage, where you're now creating the smaller elements of materials that can be issued against a work order. So you're creating little bags or drums or containers, and then you're creating basically a kit. And the last thing, you're issuing that to a work order. Well, the challenge with that process is that often you're not aware of you taking out those materials during the kitting stage. You know about usage of that material during the actual issuing to the work order, but in between the product is staged, ready to be issued to the work order, which could be a couple of days to a week, depending on how you work. That product is unidentified. And as far as visual is concerned, you're showing a full inventory amount. So the issues around there, very simply, is that at a first level, you got to make sure you're picking your oldest stock first, using a FIFO approach. And then after you've issued the materials, it's to relabel the master with the new label showing what quantity is actually remaining. You know, often a drum may be sitting on the second or third row, and from below, it may look like a full drum to you, because you can't see inside the contents. Maybe half full, who knows? And then next, when you have the kit, is to identify each element of what's on the kit itself by virtue of a barcode and a quantity. Some products require certain quantities to be issued in a certain order. So properly identifying those materials is absolutely important, with a little label on each item. And then lastly, once you issue it to the work order, is you got to have visibility around that issue time. And then if there's any unused portion that we return to stock, that has to be done efficiently. And this is where there's a huge potential win in terms of unused stock. Often, if you're if you have a roll of material, you'll have what they call a butt end, which doesn't typically go into the full stock area or the bulk areas. Goes into what I've seen a racking area where they have their unused stock farm. And this is where there's potentially huge hidden profits within any company, because a lot of times you've costed out the job, and all that material that is returned back to stock has already been paid for. You know, we took a tour of a steel manufacturer with all these rolls of steel that were basically left available for other jobs. They had no visibility of it, and I asked them the value of that inventory. He says roughly $250,000. That's $250,000 that will fall directly to the bottom line if you use it for jobs. And the key, of course, is to properly label it and track its location. Next is the picking and shipping. And this is where you see typically, I see typically the greatest variability and productivity amongst workers. And the key difference here is that is this the guy who happens to know where everything is the guy who's typically the most efficient. So basically, your warehouse runs on the basis of whoever knows where stuff is, which in my view is not a great way to run a warehouse. Knowledge of where product is in the inventory should be in the system and not in people's heads. So that's the number one driver of productivity in most warehouses I see today. It's just the guy who knows where everything is. Next is the pallet build quality. A lot of guys can build a 70 cube pallet that's only 6 feet high. I've seen pallets built 8 feet, 7 feet high, because the guy just wasn't trained properly on how to build a pallet with mixed loads. Next, look at bottlenecks, and these bottlenecks speak to your picking process itself, right? Particularly around how do you allocate tasks, how do you allocate lines? Are you doing typical? In most places, it's one-to-one, one CO to one picker. Is there any way you can do things like gang picking or wave picking, where you're breaking out the order and spreading it among several people at a time? And of course, once you break out an order, is how do you consolidate it? How do you rebuild a pallet after that? And that may be a bottleneck in the process itself. The third thing that happens as a consequence of picking is this natural phenomenon called honeycombing. And if you look at the picture on the right, you see pretty much an empty aisle there. And that's just because everybody packs up stuff or inventory according to part number. And as you pick through a particular aisle, it becomes empty. So you end up having all these half-empty empty aisles where you've got basically wasted space. So, and this is the tricky part of warehouse management, is that somebody needs to go around and be able to move product around such that you don't have these half-empty aisles sitting around in your warehouse. And that's a dedicated activity that somebody needs to do on a regular basis. And that's something that needs to be scheduled. And then look at, as I alluded earlier, some more sophisticated picking strategies, such as gang picking or wave and zone, where you've got basically a series of orders, you're sending it down to the warehouse, and the system is breaking it down into the various zones. So for example, if you have refrigerated areas, the guy who's driving the refrigerated or working in the refrigerated area and he's got all the proper clothing equipment, he's getting all the refrigerated orders. Likewise, if you're sending product to the flow racks, that's eaches, then it's going to people that you're taking orders that are a certain quantity size. So if it's less than a case, for example, then you're sending all your eaches picks to those flow rack areas. And that's some of the more sophisticated strategies you may want to consider, particularly if you're doing a lot more e-commerce store orders, which is typically a smaller unit of measurement and smaller quantities. Replen. And this is one of the most overlooked areas in a warehouse, and I've seen a lot of companies where the replen is actually done by the more senior people in the warehouse. And because it's tricky, your pick faces, or the areas where you do the picking, should reflect the units of measurement that is actually being ordered by your customers. So basically, you may order in case or pallet quantities, but when it comes to picking, the actual picking should be presented in such a way that it's the most efficient. So in other words, if a customer is ordered by cases, make sure the cases are presented to them, and then decide what's the best equipment for doing that picking process. So likewise, if you have eaches, then make sure that that eaches are presented. And a lot of customers use flow racking for that because it's very compact. You have a cart set up to support that picking, and then it drives. And then the question becomes, how do you break down the orders so that you have your eaches going to one area, your cases going to another, and then of course the consolidation. And so what happens is you end up having all these different sorts of racking configurations. Some are pallets, some are flow racks with eaches, and some are bulk picks. So the question becomes, how do you do a replen around that, and when? Typically, a lot of our customers do a replen in the morning just before picking happens, which is typically later in the day. A lot of our customers have pick windows open till, say, 3 or 4. Sorry, order windows open till 3 or 4, and then they drive the picking that happens after that. So during the day, they're checking their replens. The system will be alerting them based on min-max to do a replen and let down, and breaking those quantities into their appropriate units of measurement. And of course, replen also has to happen on a FIFO basis if you're on that type of traceability or concern. Right? And finally, number 10, your data. And this is probably actually ironically, this is the first place you would start. If you're curious as to where to start and which of the top 10 to pick, it really comes down to looking at your data. And a lot depends on, for example, if you're a made-to-order versus made-to-stock. So if you're a made-to-order company, chances are you're more concerned around your raw materials. It's got to be in stock, as I mentioned. If you're made-to-stock, then you're more concerned around your finished goods and perhaps your sub-assemblies. So if those areas are not working for you, in other words, if your raw materials inventory is typically out, then I would say, hey, let's take a look at your receiving, Let's take a look at your cycle counts around your raw materials. Let's take a look at your issuing processes. If, on the other hand, your finished goods inventory leaves a lot to be desired because, let's say, your fill rates aren't up there, you're having to add more pickers to it, or you're getting a lot of returns because the accuracy isn't there, I would say let's take a look at your inventory of your finished goods. So in particular, let's look at your FG receiving processes, your put-away processes for FG, as well as your picking and shipping processes. So it's pretty easy once you've looked at your data and what's not working for you in those particular areas, where to zero in on the processes and equipment that perhaps need to be looked at and or replaced. Then ask yourself, despite having that data being accurate, is it timely? Is it serving the needs of the business? In other words, are you getting the type of real-time information you need so that, for example, if you're creating kits on the floor for raw materials issuing, do the guys know where it is? Or are they walking down this aisle to find out, to try to locate where your particular kit is stored for that particular work order, right? And then, is it the right data? And let's give you a quick example. Often when you do an inventory count on behalf of the CFO or the finance department, they care about total inventory quantity relative to the books, right? And to them, if the two match, let's say they've got 98% accuracy, they're breaking out the champagne. But in reality, if you've got good data that matches the book, but it's all in different locations than what the computer system is saying, then all of a sudden I would position and say your inventory is not all that accurate. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about quantity, but it's also about location of that particular inventory. So making sure that the visibility is where you expect it to be. And lastly, do have a single source of truth. Do you have little, sort of like a squirrel that is storing nuts in the winter? Are your key data points all over the map? Is it in an Access database? Is it in an Excel spreadsheet? Is it partly in visual? I mean, how do you train somebody when they come on and work in the warehouse and say, okay, you look at this book to find out all our trace information because it's kept in this little handwritten book, versus the status of the work order is we can look that up in visual. Ideally, you want one place where you get all this kind of data points, which will then basically position you to ultimately share your data with your supply chain. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of our customers are now moving up and selling to the bigger manufacturers, as in the case of automotive, or in the case of retail, they're selling to the larger department stores like Walmart and Home Depot, and they need to get and do EDI. They also got to be ready to share their data online with those companies. For example, a lot of our companies are sharing their service parts level with the major retailers, because when they go on and say, I want to buy a gasket or a new drill bit, that inventory is actually coming directly from the visual customer. So it has to be very accurate in order for you to share it. Okay, that's it.
Good stuff, Jeff. Now, to sort of summarize this whole thing, there were 10 tips there. There would probably rhyme off another 10 if we spent some time thinking about it and asked you for input. Basically, what you're trying to do with any effective warehouse management system that you're putting in place, or examination of the business processes, is you're trying to hit on these 4 key pillars: the people, the process, the data, and the resources. If you look back at the best practices that we presented, they all fall under one of these 4 headers. And ultimately, they enable either the warehouse or the manufacturer to achieve a set of business objectives, not just minimize cost of a warehouse. And that's it for us. And that's where we turn it back to you, Chris, and see if there's any questions from our participants.
That's great, Dave. Thank you. Jeff, thank you. That was a ton of content there. That was great. Folks, I think at this point, Michelle, if you can give me a hand. I know there are a couple of questions that came through. If you can just give me a hand of just unmuting a lot of folks, see if anybody has any questions, comments that they have for Dave or Jeff at this point. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the the chat.
While you're doing that, Michelle and Chris, I should mention, I forgot, I omitted to mention that everybody who's registered for a webinar today will get a copy of our ebook on best practices that we'll be putting up like in the month of March. And if there are certain
Muted. Oops.
Dave, you still there? Trying to mute and unmute everyone here. Michelle, can we get Dave back on the line here? I think he may have been muted by accident.
I don't know if he self-muted.
Okay, that's fine. I'll let you work on that. Dave, if you could still hear us, if you could flip to the next screen, just wanted to go over a couple other slides here. So while Michelle unmutes Dave, we're having a little issue there. Folks, we're also going to be doing a couple of events coming up in February, March, and then the beginning of April. We're doing a Synergy Cloud webinar, and what that webinar is going to be about is that we've actually teamed up with diverse technology solutions. So we'll now have the ability to house all of Visual, the entire software suite, delivered through a web browser. Okay, so for those folks who want to access Visual applications at any time from any device, you'll now be able to do that. Okay, we can even do subscriptions with Office, apply patches, OS upgrades, all that good stuff. So that will be on the 28th. And then on March 10th, we're going to be doing a webinar around scheduling. Okay, we're going to be discussing a few of the fundamentals around standard scheduling in Visual today. Okay, and then towards the end of March, folks, we're going to do what we call a Stop Struggling with ERP webinar. That's going to be on March 24th. And really, that webinar is going to be directed to folks that either know that they're not getting or they could be getting more out of Visual as it stands today. So we'll also be discussing some tools and services that can kind of get you the most out of Visual today. And then as we get into April, we're going to be doing a webinar on CAD-Link. Okay, it's a bidirectional tool that integrates your CAD system with Visual. Okay, so that will eliminate a ton of data entry and, most important, time. Okay, so with that said, Dave, are you back on the line? Do we know if we have Dave back on the line, Michelle?
No, he has to enter the audio pin, it looks like, Chris.
Okay.
Sorry.
So while we do have the lines open,
Back, Dave.
hello?
Hey.
there you are, Dave. Sorry about that. Not sure what happened there.
Apparently it's my fault. I'm sorry about that. Didn't touch it.
Oh, okay. That's fine. So, folks, I believe we have all the lines unmuted at this point. Does anybody have any questions for Dave or Jeff?
Hey. Hey.
So, Dave, we had a couple of questions that came through the chat. First question, and it's actually a good one. Someone's commenting here that that's a lot to a lot to digest. What's the best way to start? I don't know if you want to make a comment on that.
I'll let Jeff answer that for us.
Yeah, tip 10, which was to look at your data points and where are you weakest in your data that's not allowing your business to achieve its certain objectives. And as I mentioned, is it around issuing of raw materials? Is it around taking orders with confidence and knowing that that inventory product is on the shelves for you to fulfill that particular order? So it could be as simple as that to something a little more complex around your material handling equipment and your people resources, obviously, as well. But start with the data, and that's always and that will lead you to questions and a plan around how to address that.
Very good, Jeff. Appreciate that, Jeff. We also have one more that came in here. Looks like someone's trying to make a pitch to their boss here. What's the best way to introduce a WMS? I know that's a little open-ended, but if you want to take a stab at that.
Yeah. Well, it goes to what is the company trying to achieve, and a lot of companies are trying to, a lot of companies are growing. Fortunately, their sales are increasing, and the warehouse is typically, as Dave mentioned earlier, a bit of an afterthought, and processes need to be done in a way that are scalable, and so often they need new processes, they need certainly more visibility, and the warehouse does end up becoming a limiting factor to that growth. So, so the best way to approach it is not to sell it from the viewpoint that you'll make the operators in the warehouse, their lives easier. Yes, that will definitely happen. But really, how does it minimize and reduce the risk in the business? And if the owners or senior management are betting big on a certain product or a certain innovation go in the market, then their warehouse and supply chain need to keep up to pace and be up to snuff to support that. So the risk to them is not achieving those goals if the warehouse and their supply chain doesn't match and is not able to scale with those growth plans.
That's great, Jeff. Thank you. Folks, like I said, I think we have the lines unmuted at this point. Does anybody have any questions? Jeff, I have one that came to my mind, if you wouldn't mind giving me your take on it. What would you find, being in the business for 20+ years, what do you find the most common bad practice when walking into warehouses?
It's just the fact that their data is all over the place, is that they're not making the best use of their ERP solution. So they've got spreadsheets, they've got access databases, and maybe for a good reason. But the reality is that they end up landlocking themselves, isolating themselves in the sense that they can't move their ERP forward through upgrades or enhancements because they've got so many other subsystems feeding into it. So they're really afraid to touch their ERP, and they're actually afraid to change anything else because it's so spread out, and they become heavily dependent upon one or two people in the company who knows how these systems work. So as a result, their data is very spread out and a lot of times not real time, so it really impacts a company's ability to make good decisions around their evolving inventory.
Couldn't agree with you more, Jeff. Thanks, I appreciate that. Folks, I just wanted to make one more comment. We did record this session today. We are recording the session, rather. So that will be available. Please, if anybody or coworkers and the like would like to view the presentation, we obviously are recording it, as well as the slide deck will be available. Okay. And I think that's it from what we had from the chat. Folks, if anybody would like to explore a conversation with myself, Dave, or Jeff at Portable Intelligence, please reach out to your rep by territory here. We'll gladly facilitate a call with them. You can certainly do that, okay? Dave, did you have any last comments for us here today?
Yeah, real quick one. Just I tried to do. Apparently, I was muted earlier. As a thanks to everybody who's registered for today's session, we're obviously going to be sending them a copy of our ebook that we're in the midst of writing on best practices. But if there are any topics that folks would like to see us dig into deeper, by all means, reach out and let us know what you'd like to see content written on.
Very good. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Dave. Jeff, really appreciate your time today. And like I said, folks, anybody who would like the slide deck, the recording, or as Dave has just mentioned, an ebook that's coming out, I believe at the end of February, early March, please just reach out to us and we'll get you a copy. Okay? Very good. Thanks, Jeff. Dave, I really appreciate it. We'll keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Take care.